Panelists, who'd like to go first?
So where I live, I live in an area that's actually zoned for single-family homes, but traditionally there's a lot of different forms. I have a duplex right next to me, I have a fourplex that's behind me, and really I think we should go back to that, where those different types of forms are allowed to be built. I have a home right across the street from me it was a small home that was torn down, and I don't mean to pick on my neighbors, but now it's a giant 4,000 square foot home. It's probably $1.2, $1.3 million. That is not something that a lot of people can afford.
I'd like to see the end of racially biased zoning. We see a lot of our neighborhoods are completely rezoned where others are allowed to remain compose the character, I guess, of the neighborhood. I'd also like to see the end of supermajority. The more land you own, the more your vote is worth. The more your vote matters. Thank you. So, good luck, City Council, please.
I see a hand up. So real quick, we're writing on the little golf carts.
You know what, it's hard. I just want to ask a question. Where do you live? Do you live in a historic district? So as much as you're telling us to transform our zoning?
I live in Tempe, Mass.
No, I'm asking Anna.
I do actually, yeah. I just moved to Congress Park. I lived in Hilltop in a 5-plex actually, and I tried to get that redeveloped into a missing middle property. And supermajority actually killed the whole project.
All right, other panelists?
And I'm a renter, actually, but yeah, here we go.
Ideas? Cheney?
Secure funding for BRT implementation.
Mark?
I would say increase the funding. This is me just pitching my thing again for land trust. Create more funding for land trust, make it more affordable, more accessible. I think what we see, I think the city, or a number of people are looking back over these last 10, 15 years saying, if we'd only preserved more land for redevelopment, if we'd only purchased and banked more land, so a fund for land banking.
I think looking at some of these urban design standards, and some of that's in the Blueprint Denver plan and other plans around how do we foster the kind of urban design we want in neighborhoods, because I think better design, I think you can have lots of different kinds of housing and different densities if you have good urban design, and we haven't seen that in recent years.
Nico?
I think we need to work on healing as a city. I see 70 or 80 years of demolition, a lot of shame attached to that, missing memories, literally erasure of cultures, and there's a lot of pressure on individuals in their individual life, but there's also sort of a tendency of disassociating different parts of the city or putting people in conflict when in fact we really share a lot of the same goals and desires. And one thing that needs to be understood is that zoning is a very blunt kind of tool, even when you have form-based zoning, and as I mentioned in my brief talk, that we want to include as many forms in that form base now. There were a lot of things that just couldn't be included at the time. It became so onerous and large that this study, there was no way to reserve it. But I think we can take it to the next level with community work. And one area I mentioned before that I really look at is this confusion between a 2.5 story and a 3-story usage that generally leads to design that maximizes the area, but does not tend to the kind of design issues of feathering in new density and new missing middle buildings into existing neighborhoods. There's an appropriate size. What I think we need to do is give people additional height for a pitched roof. So it's not either I get 3 stories or, a pitched roof just won't do it. I'll only get 2 floors I can sell, or sort of a half floor. So there's, as an architect, there's really specific things that can open up the viability and the trust of the neighborhoods to some new development that gets feathered in.
Thank you, Nico. Go ahead, Matt.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. What's your charge
Who's
to
here?
the city council? You have 3 members sitting here. What's an idea you'd like to see put in place?
Sure. I would say that in future neighborhood plans, it would be great to see the city dedicate a little bit more money and description within the RFPs to the public education process. I think that a lot of the discord among neighbors could be avoided if the process was started earlier among neighbors. This is something that's really successful with the Denver Architecture Foundation's outreach efforts to build a park in advance of the West Area Plan, engaging RNO and RNO members, the board and the members, about the basics of zoning, urban design, and development pressures. So I think that every citizen in Denver deserves the opportunity to learn about that before the neighborhood plan becomes bearing down on it.
Wonderful, thank you. My next question, I'd like us to explore the relationship between the ideas we've proposed tonight and the existing relationship, the existing transportation infrastructure in our community. RTD recently announced that they saw a 13.7% decline in light rail ridership and a 1.8% drop system-wide. My question is this: what can our communities do to mitigate some of the infrastructure challenges we may see if the ideas presented tonight are put into place? Anyone can answer that. That's not trying to fit
I guess I'll start. People aren't going to wait longer than 10 minutes or less. They're not going to pay more. I don't have the exact price. So if we want, Thank you. Yeah. For one fare. So if we want quality transit, we need density. I mean, and that's unfortunately just the way it is. We look at countries abroad, and they have pretty high density and amazing public transit.
I agree. Around those 2 things, around more density as well as decreasing prices. I mean, the cost to ride the train it's $10 to get out to the airport. That's an expensive ride. Also, RTD has its power, I think, to loosen up some of their requirements around parking structures. Building affordable housing around the TOB station should be kind of a slam dunk around the parking. It has been difficult to use the RTD spaces. We tried and we finally made a breakthrough in one of our buildings, but it was not without a lot of arm twists in there. But there's a lot of unused space there and shared parking opportunities at the RTD stations that would support a lot of affordable housing development around it. And we can reduce the cost of affordable housing by not having to pay the infrastructure cost of parking.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to move on to our audience questions just to make sure that your questions are heard. So the first question is, will the construction defects bill be updated again? Would anyone like to answer that? Cheney, I saw a head nod. Want to talk about it? Or Mark, you want to talk about it?
Will it be updated? Right now, the moratorium's been lifted up, but I think until developers start to see those first deals go up, that the thing that has to happen is insurance costs need to drop and the monitoring costs. When those 2 things happen, I think the moratorium is fine now. I think that the gateway has been open. It just needs to be a matter of implementing some of these development plans or building the actual developments to see the drop in construction or drop in insurance costs.
Thank you.
If I could add to that. Right now, I think there's a lot of developers who are used to doing fee simple construction, in other words, side-by-side, separate lot construction, and there are going to require some pioneers to get back into the small condo game. So our zoning, therefore, I think in the short term needs to be willing to find solutions for affordable and attainable housing within a fee simple way, but then evolve to hopefully embrace the return of small condos.
Thank you. This question says, climate change is the most important crisis. It seems increased density we're facing is a necessary response to fighting climate change. What other aspects of the plan can we change in regards to the climate crisis?
Change the exterior plan.
Yes. Is that right?
So there was a thing, I think it was either Denver Right or Denver Post recently, talking about the bike lane network that is going to be built out, and it's going to take 18 years. That's not good enough. 18 years, we're already well past the problem, so that's something we really need to focus on.
This question is for Cheney. Where does the allowance for retaining existing structures come from? I'll say it again. Where does the allowance for retaining existing structures come from? Question.
The allowance for retaining existing structures, I don't know, can you,
You mentioned that there might be an allowance given by the city for retaining
yeah,
rather than scraping.
okay.
Where's that money come from?
Oh, no, I didn't mean a monetary allowance, sorry. The program would be, the thought is to combine it with tweaking the existing zoning standards to make new construction smaller, while then allowing some of those, the standards that we have now to apply to if you save an existing structure. So that's the allowance, not monetary, sorry.
Thank you. This question is for Anna. What is the overall demographics of Denver with respect to race and ethnicity? These are questions you ask us.
Yeah, so I was really specifically talking about the demographics of DPS. As I said, 70% Black and brown students. I believe that, I don't know the demographics of Denver specifically.
70% white.
70% white, but
No, it's 60.
70, I think it's 70%, about 10% African American, somewhere in the range of about 3 to 5% Asian, and I believe the remainder of that, about 18% Latino. Is that about right? Do those add up to 100?
We all have our homework to do with this
sorry about that.
after this event. All right, I'm just going to push forward, just make sure we have everyone's questions and comments heard. This, I believe, is a comment on question. Historic designation might mean added expenses for owners in order to comply. If the city supports the concept of preservation, there should be some offset for property. Thoughts? Sure. I'll say it slower. Maybe I'm speaking too fast. Historic designation might mean, historic landmark designation might mean added expenses for owners in order to comply. If the city supports the concept of preservation, there should be some offset for property.
Property taxes.
Property taxes. Like the senior discount, sorry, there was a second side. Like the senior discount. Thoughts on that?
There are some programs that exist at the state level that provide incentives to owners of designated properties, but we would be interested, especially if there was an income qualifier, for if there was additional rebates or other forms to incentivize preservation. We're certainly supportive of that. But I want to clarify, I think some of the stuff that's in the East Central Area Plan is not related to historic designation in the formal sense, but simply encouraging the retention of older homes, which is just a slightly different thing.
My comment was more for the city council people for the city to actually walk the talk. They keep talking about they want to have preservation, but they don't do anything to offset it, and there are extra expenses. So why doesn't the city start looking at the program like they have for seniors, where if you've been in your house for 10 years, you're over 65, you get the first $100,000 off your valuation. Just a thought, if the city wants to walk the talk.
Appreciate that. Here's another question. Isn't the reason we haven't seen ADUs being built because ADUs can't be subdivided and sold fee simple? That's a question / statement.
Well, ADUs are a complicated issue. I've been advocating them since 1998 at the Elitch Gardens redevelopment, where attached ADUs were built in and did really well. They did so well you can barely find a market comparable of what it's worth because no one sold it. The cash flow is so good, people are actually staying put because it's really effective in that context. So it must be seen as something that's not necessarily affordable housing either. And it must be seen reaching people where they're at in their lives as they're at. And it's definitely part of the preservation formula, in my opinion, of maintaining street character and only affecting the alleys. One of the things that it does do is it takes out the land speculation aspect, in part, except for that owner who has to reside in the front house, the host house I call it, or in the ADU. So, you have to bring in circumstances. At $80,000 a year, assisted living is quite expensive. You could buy a ground level cottage if you could somehow finance that. So we need to open up the financing in terms of a cash flow for an individual. Otherwise, just go do some tandem homes. You can sell them off if you want.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I just want to say part of the problem is that the rules are really onerous for ADUs. Logan, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but this is a guy right here in Capitol Hill who built an ADU, and what did it take you, like 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, it was really tough to build. We were zoned BMU5, and there's a 20-unit apartment building right next door, but we weren't allowed to build an ADU behind our house because it's an old house that had been previously split up into a couple of units. So it's just, it seems like the rules don't really make it that accessible.
I'd like to jump in as well. So I'm among the folks that are considering building an ADU on my own property. I have a 37.5 foot wide lot, 125 feet deep approximately, and with an average size bungalow and an average 20 by 20 garage. We don't have the lot coverage allowable. You can only build 37.5% of your lot coverage out in an SU zone or a TU zone. So we just can't fit an ADU. One thing that I think would be great for the city to explore would be allowing a little bit more lot coverage for ADUs, perhaps in exchange for implementation of green roofs, either on top of the ADU itself or on garages or on the roof of the house. One of the main reasons why we are, resisting additional lot coverage is so that we don't increase impermeability. So if there could be a compromise where we could take advantage of all this great education that has happened within the environmental design professions to implement green roofs that now is all going to waste, that could perhaps solve that issue.
Thank you. This question is to increase affordability and support transit, we need to eliminate the minimum parking requirement. Will the area plans consider this recommendation? Cheney?
Yes, it is a recommendation to, instead of minimum parking, having maximum parking, meaning that the developer chooses how much they put in. They often do still put in parking to meet the needs and banks require, but it would be a maximum instead of a minimum along transit.
How can outreach plans be improved? One idea, please, from anyone. How can outreach plans be improved?
These meetings are hard. I have a baby. I'm sure many of you have children. So, my suggestion is bring the meeting to the people. I've never been in this church before, and so that's just one idea.
This may sound facetious, but I think we need to be more thoughtful with social media. There are good places for hearty debate, and then there's really just unhealthy debate online right now, and I don't think it's supporting the kind of dialogue we need to be having. That is
A couple specific recommendations. I think if the developer wants to promote a zoning change, that they should definitely be required to present a site plan and a basic building concept to justify that change. It should not be a road off-the-shelf kind of zoning thing. The other thing that has occurred in a lot of community work that I've been a part of, it was either successful or not successful. The way a developer can increase trust during an extended process is to be open to the outcome. And the one way to be open to an outcome that maybe is determined through participation is to actually present 3 or 4 viable schemes and discuss a combination. Participation isn't, oh, here, this is what I'm doing and I want your permission or your approval. True participation is a long, extended process. A charrette's not one weekend, it's not 5 minutes in a room. It often involved 30 meetings at the old Elitch Gardens, which involved a PUD, which is a specialized process that we still have on the books but rarely do. It can be overextended, but with trust being built through decision-making, shared decision-making, I think the process could be accelerated so it's not such a burden for developers. And so site plan and a true participation with many variants and choices.
Thank you. Next question. So, given the frequent use of historic districts as de facto redlining, can existing districts be revisited and potentially shrunk? Annie?
That's a fairly loaded question, obviously. The data nationally on historic districts is that they are more diverse and walkable and connected than often adjacent non-designated areas or areas that don't have historic resources at all. So I think that probably is a bit of an overstatement on that role. And Denver, the number of historic districts in Denver hovers at 4%, which is pretty small when you think about 190,000 parcels across the city. It's also very comparable with other cities. It's smaller than, for example, the amount of historic districts in New York City. So I think that historic districts, have a place. Blueprint Denver confirms their validity in our city, but I also don't think they're going to increase significantly in their percentage because they are a specialized tool that isn't appropriate everywhere.
Anyone else address that? No. Okay. Does the plan include permanent housing for people with no income? Cheney?
So our affordable housing recommendations do recommend funding become available to assist those. I am not as well versed in our housing recommendations. I will say I don't know them verbatim as I do the land use, but we certainly we feel like we have addressed all of the needs and a lot of it that you've addressed as well.
Yes, I would say, yes, there are dollars available for affordable housing for people who earn less than 30% of the area median income, as well as
zero.
Down to zero, exactly. And generally, there are dollars for homeless, and also there are people who are on Medicare or Medicaid receive certain fundings as well for dollars available for housing. So the city has set aside specific dollars for this population for 30% below of the area median income.
Follow-up question for you. How can we make community benefit agreements improve development? That's for you.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
We actually worked with the city to create one for the 38th and Blake overlay district here. One of the things, you receive your incentive in 2 ways here. First, if you're developing residential, 10% of the delta, say you've got a lot that's zoned for 8 stories. You can go up to 16, but 10% of that delta has to be for affordable. When the formula worked out, it actually is a little less. So there needs to be more robust numbers around that formula to increase the amount of affordability on the residential side. On the commercial side, we work with developers here to create a community benefit for the retail space so that if you're developing retail space or commercial space, the same applies. 10% of your commercial space, if you were taking advantage of the incentive, has to be used for community benefits, such as nonprofit groups or artist groups. There needs to be better designation around what those community groups are. There needs to be a little bit more itemization, I would say, here around that. And finally, I guess the benefit agreement needs to, I think, stretch and allow multiple developers to join together to create space that's, that they might not be able to get into each building, but can combine in one building.
Yes, I'd like to say on that. Community serving use agreements are the alternative to affordable housing provision for the incentive overlays. And to my knowledge, somewhere around 3 or 4 applications for community serving uses have been received by the Office of Economic Development for things other than affordable housing, specifically for commercial build properties. If you look at the ordinance and you look at the zoning code regarding community serving uses and community serving use agreements, it's very vague. So to echo Mark's point, I think that developers, generally like predictability, and if it can be spelled out a little bit more what it means to build a pocket park next to your property, or what it means to provide, local nonprofit use or local commercial use specifically, then you'll see a little bit more of that happening.
Cheney, you follow up on that?
Yeah, and Nico mentioned this, but our plan recommends that, and we know that it's hard to define this community serving use, so we recommend when a development does want to utilize that, engaging the neighbors in the community and survey them as far as what they consider a community serving use.
Cheney, this question is for you from the audience. Where did you get your statistics regarding scrapes in Congress Park? Actually, this is a comment, actually very few demolitions have occurred.
Yeah, there are more additions than anywhere as well. I did not mention that, but our data comes from our GIS department at the city, and that comes from building permit data. So.
I'm going to place a moderator privilege here and ask you a question that I wrote. Can you please reflect on the process and communication efforts around the East Central Area Plan? What can be done better in our next plan, which will be the West Plan? Anyone can answer. Go ahead, Councilman Ortega.
So when you look at the west part of town, this area is going to be expected to have much more density than any neighborhood in our entire city. We're talking about 500 acres that is going to impact all of those neighborhoods that are contained within the West Area Plan. And we as a city need to be looking at the big picture, the comprehensive cumulative impact of all the development that's being proposed, because if we don't do that, we will see more gentrification and displacement of those what are considered affordable neighborhoods today, even though the price of housing has gone up in those neighborhoods. So I think the big picture planning is vital to making sure that we don't just screw it all up.
Adding to that, from the experience of outreach to Villa Park, that was through the RNO, and the demographics that were present at the RNO meetings, even in Villa Park, were not representative of Villa Park. And I think that in general, starting with RNOs is a good first step to reaching all neighbors, but it's not the only step. While they do hold a representative voice, there's many groups that don't have a voice within RNOs, and so actively reaching out to those groups, such as the Catholic Diocese in the West Side, at the same time as reaching out to RNOs would be a way to truly get community engagement.
What else? No. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise. Obviously, this is a very complicated matter, but I'm thankful for the opportunity to just have this discussion. Thank you to Matt, Nico, and Kevin, Andy, Mark, and Cheney. Thank you all.
Yeah, I should spend $50,000